On the morning of October 31st, 2019, a Kansas man called 911 crying and said his 26-year-old wife shot herself. Police initially ruled that Kristin Trickle ended her own life, but the evidence didn't support that. They later found out her husband, Colby, had searched the internet just 10 days before her death to find out how much her insurance policy paid out. And what did Colby buy with his wife's insurance money? A $2,000 sex doll. What happened to Kristin Trickle? Hi everyone, my name's Anne, but I also go by my nickname Nini. I like to focus on Midwest true crime because I'm a Minnesota farmer's daughter. Today we're going to go to Kansas and talk about the murder of Kristin Trickle. And yes, you heard that right in the opening. Colby Trickle murdered his wife and then used her insurance money to buy a $2,000 sex doll. Colby Trickle just wanted to tickle his pickle with a doll. Okay, I got that out of my system. No more jokes. Yeah, it is kind of funny what he did with the insurance money, but the main focus here is that a very sweet young woman lost her life at the hands of her husband. Kristin really did seem just like a sweet girl, and her husband just seemed like a pig. So let's get into it. Kristin was born on August 20th, 1993 in California. She was described as sweet with a gentle spirit. She was always smiling. Her mother left when Kristin was 2. It sounds like Kristin might have had some struggles growing up, but I didn't come across any specifics. When she was 17, Kristin moved in with her aunt and uncle, Delyn and Brant Rice, in Hays, Kansas. Brant was a pastor. They had 3 children, and Kristin became more like a big sister to them than a cousin. She thrived living with her aunt and uncle. They helped her focus on her studies, they got her involved in the church, and most importantly, they showed her love and supported her. Kristin graduated high school in 2013 and then earned a certificate in business administration from North Central Kansas Technical College. When Kristin was 18, she met Colby Trickle, who was also 18.
This is me. I am sitting. I am waiting for the next song. Patience is a virtue. This is a pipe, just so you know. Oh, need a pick, I need a pick. Need a These things are delicious. Come on. Can you hear that? I don't know where the mic is on this thing.
He was a musician and played in the worship band at the church where her uncle preached. Kristin was impressed by how well Colby could play guitar and how he wrote his own songs.
Hey y'all, this is Sea-Dog here. This is a song that I wrote. I'm gonna post the lyrics down underneath. That way you can read it as you listen if you want to. Well, you and I just finished arguing. My mind still feels like it's toppling. I've gotta leave. I've gotta go. I was thinking the other day, what if cartoons got saved? They'd start singing praise in a whole new way. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, Scooby-Dooby-Doo, yeah. And the Jetsons' dog named Astro.
Kristin and Colby got married on April 25th, 2014. They moved to Kansas City, where Colby enlisted with the Army Reserves and Kristin worked at a vet clinic. Kristin absolutely loved animals. She had 2 dogs of her own and she treated them like they were her children. Not to make this about me, but I can relate to that. I got an 18-pound cat around here somewhere who is basically my son. In early 2019, Kristin and Colby moved back to Hays and Kristin reconnected with her aunt and uncle. They noticed that Colby seemed to be kind of controlling of Kristin. He would get mad if she wouldn't immediately respond to a phone call or a text message, and he seemed to be trying to pull her away from her aunt and uncle. Kristin got a job at Walmart, and Colby was still with the military. Like most young couples, they struggled with money. On October 30th, 2019, Kristin worked her normal shift at Walmart and then went home. She got some candy ready for trick-or-treaters because Halloween was the following night. She and Colby played video games and then went to bed. In the early morning hours of October 31st, Colby called 911 and said he woke up and discovered Kristin had shot herself. Police arrived and discovered Kristin laying in her bed. She was wearing only underwear and a revolver was laying on her abdomen. She had been shot underneath her chin. Remarkably, she was still alive. The responding officer carried Kristin into the living room so he'd have a little more room to perform CPR on her. As this officer tried to save Kristin's life, Colby stood on the front porch with another officer and talked about video games.
What kind of games do you guys like to play? Counter-Strike?
Everything from Call of Duty to Minecraft.
Unfortunately, they were unable to save Kristin and she passed away. The officer who had attempted CPR went out to the front porch where Colby was and told him his wife had died.
Hello. My name's Brandon Hoffman. I'm the sergeant working today. She died. And I'm so sorry.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Police asked Colby to come down to the police station just to get a little bit more information about what had happened, and they talked to him for 11 hours. Police said Colby was very cooperative with them. Colby said they had went to bed like normal, and the next thing he remembered was waking up and his ears were ringing. He then noticed Kristin laying next to him, bleeding from a gunshot wound. He said he didn't feel a pulse.
I ran up to her, and she was just looking at me.
Then what did you do?
I ran over to my phone, and I called 911.
Colby said he was so distraught that he picked up the gun and placed it to his own head.
Where was the gun at?
It was laying by her neck. I pulled it back.
What did you do with the gun?
I started to put it in my head. But I was on the phone. They said they were sending people. So I thought maybe they could help her.
Did you in fact kill her?
No.
During his 11 hours at the police station, Colby mentioned how he worked with human intelligence for the U.S. Army.
There's some interesting places they send you with being intel. But they sent me to Middle East and they sent me down into Central America.
Sounds like some movie stuff right there.
3 days after her death, the coroner ruled that Kristin ended her own life. Kristin's family didn't agree with this. Her aunt and uncle, Delyn and Brant, said Kristin never ran from her problems. Kristin had also made plans for a future business. She had found this little property outside of Hayes that had a little house on it and a little barn, and she wanted to buy that someday and turn it into a pet boarding business. And speaking of animals, Kristin had 2 dogs who, like I said, she treated like children. Her dogs meant so much to her that her family didn't think that she would just leave the dogs. They were her babies. And I thought this part was really sweet. To honor Kristin's love of animals, the family asked, in lieu of gifts, to make donations to the local Humane Society. Even though the coroner ruled that Kristin ended her own life, police were still investigating the case, because right from the get-go, there were some odd things that they noticed. And a lot of it did not point to Kristin ending her own life. For one, she was found in only her underwear. Kristin's family described her as very modest, but I would think even if you weren't the most modest person in the world, if you're planning to end your own life, you know people are going to find your body, so you probably wouldn't wear just underwear. I'm sure there's people out there that would do it, but that's just very unusual. The police also noticed that Kristin's morning alarm had been set because as they were on the scene that morning, it had kept going off. They took that as, well, Kristin had plans to get up the next morning and go to work and go about her day. But I didn't think that was too unusual because if you have a regular schedule, you probably have a reoccurring alarm set on your phone. Like for me, I get up at the same time Monday through Friday every Monday through Friday. So I just have the alarm set for those days for Monday through Friday. Like I never have to turn it on. So it's possible she just had a reoccurring alarm set up. I do agree with police though about the bowls of candy for trick-or-treaters. That I think shows that Kristin had plans for the next day. She prepared bowls of candy so that the next night they'd be all ready to go to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters for Halloween. Again, it's not the same for every scenario, but I would think in usual circumstances, if you're thinking of ending your own life, preparing Halloween candy is going to be the furthest from your mind. Police felt that the gun used would have been too heavy for Kristin to handle. She was a small girl. The gun was a full-size .357 revolver. Her aunt and uncle said that Kristin was scared of guns. Colby told police Kristin kept the revolver on her side of the bedroom, but there were other firearms and ammunition found on Colby's side of the bedroom and no weapons or ammunition found on Kristin's side. Police also found a picture from prior to Kristin's death, and in it you can clearly see the revolver is on Colby's nightstand. When police arrived at the house that morning, they had found the revolver lying on Kristin's stomach. And remember, Colby had said he was so distraught at the sight of his wife with a gunshot wound, he had picked up the gun and pointed it to his own head.
I started to put it in my head.
But then he changed his mind. Why would he have put the gun back on his wife's body? I would think you would have just set it on the nightstand or maybe even on the bed, because where it was found on her would have been where it would have been found if Kristin had shot herself. It was pointed in the right direction and not that far from her chin. So if Colby was telling the truth about everything, that means he put the gun back in the exact same position he had found it when he woke up. Very odd. Kristin had a mark under the left side of her chin, which they believed to be from the barrel of the gun. Kristin was right-handed, so she would have been holding the gun in this hand. Police thought for that scenario, what usually happens is if she had picked up the gun and pointed it under her chin, it would have been directly in the center or it would have been off to the right, not over to the left. Since no guns or ammunition were found on Kristin's side of the bed, all that was found on Colby's side of the bed. Police wondered if what really happened was Colby kept that revolver in his nightstand, and in the middle of the night, while Kristin was still asleep, he picked up that revolver, rolled over, and held it under her chin and pulled the trigger. He then laid it on her stomach to make it look like she had shot herself. Which, if that's how it went down, I really hope that meant Kristin was asleep and she didn't feel a thing, and she didn't know what was coming. Can you imagine the betrayal you would feel in those last few moments of your life if you saw your husband pointing a gun at you? Police asked Colby if Kristin had any life insurance plans.
I have some on me from military, but that's it.
That was a lie. Kristin had a life insurance plan through SGLI, which was for spouses of military members. Police collected digital evidence and they found out that just 10 days before Kristin's death, Colby had searched on his phone how much Kristin's life insurance would pay out. They also found out in the months prior to Kristin's death, Colby had been having an online affair on Snapchat with a woman he had met playing video games. He had even texted this woman the morning of Kristin's death while he was at the police station. She had texted him and Colby texted back and said, "I'm sorry, I'm busy and can't talk right now, but I wish I could." The life insurance wasn't the only thing Colby had lied about. Remember how he talked about working in human intelligence for the U.S. Army and how he had been sent overseas many times to do this kind of work? Police checked with the military, and Colby had never been sent overseas. Ever. Police also looked at the text messages between Colby and Kristin in the months leading up to her death, and it did seem like things weren't completely rosy with them, because Kristin was beginning to feel confident. She was learning how to stand on her own 2 feet and not be pushed around. And Colby liked to control Kristin. He was the kind of guy that liked to tell her what to do and know where she was at all times. And it seemed like Kristin was finally having enough of that. In April, he had texted her and said she was acting different and was kind of pushy. Kristin texted back and said, quote, "I'm just deciding to stick up for myself. Just like you, I'm taking control of the situation," unquote. On November 4th, 2019, police brought Colby back to the police station for some follow-up questions.
10 days ago, you looked up a life insurance issue?
When? I never did.
You did.
I never did. If I would die?
No, if your spouse died.
Colby tried to say that Kristin probably made that search on his phone.
We always gave each other access to each other's phones and stuff.
Police looked at surveillance footage from the Walmart where Kristin worked, and at the exact moment that search was made, Kristin was seen at that Walmart working. And you can clearly see in that video that she did not have a phone in her hand. When asked about the affair he was having on Snapchat with that other woman, Colby did admit to it, but he claimed they had never met in person. So as you can see, all signs are pointing at Colby and not that Kristin took her own life. The investigators had a huge problem, though, because the coroner had ruled that Kristin ended her own life. This made search warrants really difficult to get. Police kept trying to figure out how to find some more evidence so that they could charge Colby or at least get a search warrant, and meanwhile, Colby just went on with his life. He kept up with his music and performed at local businesses. He posted self-help videos on Facebook.
So whatever storm you're in, keep pushing forward. Get to the outside where you're free and enjoy life.
About a year after Kristin's death, Colby received her life insurance payouts. He received $23,000 from Walmart and $100,000 from the military. Colby did do some responsible things and he paid off debt, but he also spent a lot of money on video games and music equipment. Just 2 days after receiving the life insurance money is when Colby bought that life-size sex doll. And it was a $2,000 sex doll. I mean, that must have been some doll. Kristin's family did find out about the doll. I don't know if they didn't find out about it until the trial or if they knew around the time that he had bought it. I mean, I don't think that's something that you would like post on Facebook, like, oh, look what I bought today. But when they found out, they were appalled. Kristin's aunt Delynn said it was almost like Colby had used her insurance money to buy a replacement for her. Just 8 months after receiving the $123,000 from Kristin's life insurance, Colby had spent every dollar. In January 2021, Robert Anderson started his job as the new Ellis County attorney. Investigators showed him Kristin's case and said they felt strongly it was homicide and asked if he could do something to help them. He agreed to help them, and I don't know exactly what he did, but he was able to get things moving. And in July 2021, he had Colby arrested and charged with first-degree murder and interfering with law enforcement.
Hey, can I get you to step out of the car and come to the back of the car with me? Detectives, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Place you under arrest. You turn around, put your hands behind your back.
Sure.
I didn't do it, and I know you. I know many people don't believe that, and I respect that.
His trial began in September 2023, and it was difficult for the prosecution because the coroner still had the ruling that Kristin had ended her own life. Colby's defense claimed Kristin suffered from depression and had so from a very young age, and it all stemmed back to when her mother left her when she was so little. The prosecutor hired a psychologist, Dr. Ashley Christensen, to perform a psychological autopsy on Kristin. She talked to family, friends, coworkers, and reviewed Kristin's social media. Dr. Christensen testified at the trial and said data showed Kristin had a lot of hope at the time of her death. She was making plans for the future, including her pet boarding business. Dr. Christensen said that Colby had told her that Kristin had found out about his online affair, and the last the two of them had talked about it was about a week before her death. I think he was just trying to show a reason why Kristin might have been distraught and took her own life. But he ended up contradicting himself because when police had talked to Colby in November of 2019, he told them he didn't think Kristin knew about the affair.
Did Kristin find out about that relationship? Not that I know of.
Dr. Christensen's psychological assessment was that Kristin was at a low risk for wanting to end her own life.
It is my opinion that it is relatively less likely that her death was the result of suicide.
Colby's lawyer claimed Colby didn't remember making any searches about how much Kristin's life insurance would pay out, but she did say that around the time of that search, Colby had been filling out insurance papers and so thought maybe he had done a search related to that. And of course, the sex doll was brought up during the trial.
There's a $1,942 payment to True Touch Dolls. Were you able to determine what that was?
This is a company that made and manufactures and distributes
life-size sex dolls.
Colby's mother testified that Colby bought the sex doll because after Kristin's death, he was having nightmares and wanted the doll for, quote, warmth and comfort and not for sex, unquote.
For comfort and warmth. We have electric blankets that we use for that.
That's like the equivalent of back in the day when mothers would find Playboy magazines in their teenage sons' rooms and the sons would be like, I'm just reading the articles, Mom. The trial lasted 1 week and the jury deliberated for about 2 hours. On September 20th, 2023, Colby Trickle was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife and interference with law enforcement. After the trial was over, the coroner did change Kristin's death certificate to state homicide. He admitted he had made the ruling without examining the gun or talking to Kristin's family. But it wasn't necessarily all his fault because he said he didn't know that Colby had been having an online affair and that he had searched online how much Kristin's life insurance would pay out. He claims that the investigators never shared that information with him, and if they had, he said he wouldn't have ruled that she had ended her own life. In November 2023, Colby was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He spoke at his sentencing, which occurred shortly before his 30th birthday. He said he was sorry he was a bad husband, but claimed he did not shoot Kristin.
Something that I cannot apologize for is harming Kristin that morning, because I cannot apologize for what I didn't do. Regardless of that fact, I still take partial blame for that morning. I always wonder if she would still be here had I been a better husband.
That's all she wrote, folks. C-Dog. Yeah, timing out.
I know I keep saying it, but Kristin really did seem like such a sweet girl. It sounds like she maybe had a rough start to life, but then she got back on her feet. She had a love of animals, and her dream was to have this pet boarding business so she could be around animals all day and take care of them. It's such a shame she ever met Colby Trickle. He took her life when she was just 26 years old. She would have done good things with her life. That's all I have for this case. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.